Hi, I'm Ben Coimbra, and this is my presentation of my final project for History 485, talking about Middle East revolutions in Islam, and in particular the Iranian Revolution and the Turkish Revolution. Kind of started as a project to explore the role of religion in these revolutions, and ended as more of a study of how we can learn about Islam and its role in the future from how it behaved in the context of the Iranian Revolution and the Turkish Revolution. So let's get started. First, just to briefly cover some revolutionary theories that we learned about during the class. First and foremost, revolutions are extremely complex. They are difficult to predict, and there's a lot of disagreement about how and why they occur. The first theory we studied was very straightforward. It's kind of a set of characteristics set out by Jack Goldstone regarding how revolutions occur. To just a really high level view, a lot of that has to do with discontent related to the exclusion of political groups, the suppression of minority groups. They don't feel that they're getting representation, and then they turn to radical ideas and revolutionary methods, supplant governments, and so on and so forth. A big part of that is the fact that these radical groups generally, there's a lot of infighting, and they end up giving way to more pragmatic groups and to new status quo that is not quite so radical and revolutionary. Another theorist was that we discussed as Samuel Huntington. His primary theory was that these revolutions occur due to modernization. Situations begin to change. The existing regime cannot keep up, and groups arise to overthrow the existing regime. And again, replace them with governments that are better suited to keeping up with modernization. And then another theory was Tilley, his theory was kind of a rebuke of Huntington's, Charles Tilley, and his is a lot more complex. There's a lot more moving pieces there. In his theory, there's multiple political groups. All of them are kind of competing and jockeying for power and political control. When one of these groups gains the resources that they need in order to take power, they do so. He did concede that modernization could be a part of this due to different resources shifting around, unforeseen results of modernization, moving resources into different hands, and then those groups taking power. Okay, talk a little bit about Islam and its relationship to Western ideas. It's an Abrahamic religion originating in the Middle East. The thing that I found the most interesting is that it provides a blueprint for spiritual life, but also for political life. It governs the individual's relationship with God, but also it governs the individual's relationship with society and the state's relationship with the individual. So it actually sets out laws for governance, which is a little bit I don't know that it's necessarily completely unique to Islam, but that was something that stuck out in a lot of the reading that I did. So some of the reading I did, it did seem as if some people feel that it's incompatible with Western liberal philosophies. Western politics, kind of as they exist now, put a lot of philosophy on a lot of emphasis on the rights of the individual, rather individual expression, and that's something that in the most traditional forms of Islam is not quite as important. So, is there compatibility? We'll go into that a little bit more later in the presentation. I want to talk a little bit about the Turkish Revolution. So, the Turkish Revolution occurs after the Turkish War of Independence, during which revolutionary Turkish forces led by Mustafa Kemal Ataturk defeat the Allied powers. This is at the end of World War I, essentially, and Allied powers are kind of trying to carve up the Ottoman Empire, and Kemal resists this. And one thing that Tilly talks about is that outside stressors like defeat of a nation at the hands of a foreign power, or just war in general, can weaken the existing government. This is a great example of that. Foreign powers defeat the Ottoman Empire, and then military figure within the state, or within the existing population, kind of rises up, turns the tide, and is able to take power from there, and he forms Turkey from kind of the ashes of the Ottoman Empire. So one of the big goals for Kemal was to turn Turkey into a state that emulated these Western countries that he felt were extremely successful and modernized. So he's trying to modernize Turkey. He wants to make it more Western. A big part of that is secularism. So he goes about his campaign of secularizing the state by taking Islam and removing it from its traditional role in society. At that point in time, Islam is a very political religion. The supreme religious authority there in Turkey holds a lot of power, and he begins taking power away from members of the clergy. He discourages the wearing of traditional religious garb, and discontinues religious education, which is a big one. But one of the things this does is it sparks a debate over whether or not he's actually completely destroying Islam. People are wondering if it can even exist if it doesn't have its political power. Because traditionally does offer form of governance, and people at that time weren't sure if it could. It's a serious debate among Islamic thinkers. Can it exist within a secular state? Moving on to the revolution in Iran. This one's kind of unique because you've got smaller protests that eventually grow. They lead to mass uprisings of the population, and this all happens very rapidly. And it happens within a well-established state. So the Iranian regime, the Shah there, which is basically a monarch, he's well established. He's powerful. The state is stable, and it's overthrown very quickly, within a period of 100 days. So once the state is overthrown, it is replaced with an Islamist regime headed by the Ayatollah, and the religion plays the role of sort of organizing and facilitating the revolution. It unifies people under the banner of Shia Islam, and these religious groups do a really good job of using religious holidays, things like that, as occasions to protest. So it's really a force that kind of galvanizes the people and gets them behind the revolution. And the secular regime headed by the Shah is replaced with a regime headed by religious authority. So the way this ends up playing out is, pretty soon after taking power, the state is faced with situations that it has to address, and modern times call for modern solutions. And the state reveals itself to be pretty pragmatic in terms of how it handles these things. It begins educating women and making, these rural conservative communities a lot more comfortable with the education of women, implementing family planning, which is, neither of these concepts are something that you would associate with like a very traditional form of Islam. But by educating women, by placing the onus for family planning on women, it actually gives them power. It gives them more status, again, than what you would associate with traditional Islam. So it's interesting to see how, when push comes to shove, the religious leadership and the Islamist state kind of have the attitude that they have to adjust to the demands of reality rather than stay hard and true to traditional Islamic philosophy. Just to quickly kind of compare the two and the differences, Turkey, you have a complete split between religion and the state. They depoliticize Islam, they take away its power of governance, and they attempt to emulate, Western states, Western philosophy. Iran, very different. You have a state headed by a religious leader. It is an Islamist state, but rather than emulate Western thought, there's still some resistance there. But again, demands of reality mean that they have to be pragmatic. They do move towards a more modern way of governing the state, with Islam at the helm. And this is interesting because it's kind of uniquely Middle Eastern. It's you get to see Islam develop as a philosophy and see how it deals with the demands of a modern world. So to kind of just wrap things up here, to go back to the question I asked earlier, is Islam compatible with Western philosophy? I mean, it's just it's interesting to look at these things. Like obviously, you've got two very different examples of how Islam moves into the modern world. Again, when the demands of the modern world force it to. So in Turkey, obviously, you have one solution. In Iran, you have another solution. But both of those are solutions. So it'll be interesting to see how these things develop. And as the world gets more and more global, obviously the demands that the world places on these traditional philosophies are going to force it to change. So I would say yes. I'd say that obviously we're kind of still going through some growing pains in terms of how the Middle East and the West interact with each other. But if history has shown anything, it's that philosophy will change to meet the demands of reality. So you might have secular Islamic states. You might have Islamic, not secular Islamic states rather, but secular states that incorporate Islam as spiritual governance, while keeping it depoliticized. And you're going to have states where Islam may still exist as the governance, but it's going to have to take a more pragmatic form. It's going to have to adjust to the modern world. And I think we'll see more of that moving forward. But it's just interesting to study Turkey and Iran as ways, the aftermaths of these revolutions, kind of seeing the role that Islam played, and I think that those are going to be good blueprints for how continues to modernize. Okay, and just have some references here. That is the end of my presentation. Thank you for listening.